What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Just got done watching two classics go down. I was hotboxing the wheels with my homie, and we were all the way tapped in to Alabama, Georgia, and Oregon-Penn State. We were watching them on my tablet. We had the split screen going. Unfortunately, my tablet died on me. He didn't have a port in his car for me to charge my tablet up with, so we had to get a little bit bootleg. He put the Alabama-Georgia game on his phone. I put the Oregon-Penn State game on mine. We put both of our phones on the dashboard, and we had some trouble trying to follow both games. It's a little foul that ESPN and NBC had two classics being played at the same time. I would have preferred if they had Alabama-Georgia being played at 3:30 on ABC, and they let Oregon-Penn State be the standalone big primetime night game, because Penn State has a home field environment that's second to none. The wideout, the Mo Bamba. When I was at FAU, they used to play Mo Bamba and try to get us to sing along. And I used to say to myself, this is so lame. Y'all trying to jack Penn State's flow with Mo Bamba. Y'all making me want to go to a Penn State game. And with how that environment was rocking tonight, it's on my to-do list before I die to go to a big Penn State game, man, because that environment is the best in college football, and there's no debate about that. And it's unfortunate that Penn State came up short in spite of over 100,000 being in attendance. Oregon got the win 30-24. We'll dive into what this win shows about Oregon, and of course, Penn State now being 4-21 against top 10 teams against James Franklin, along with Alabama being the first team in over 6 years to beat Georgia in Athens. I knew that Georgia was a hard team to beat at home, but I didn't know that they've gone nearly half a decade without a loss in Athens. And there's some more games that we'll dive into. There was a criminal display of offense in College Station. Illinois took down USC. USC doing what they always do, finding ways to blow wins late during games. If you are an NFL fan and your favorite team needs to draft a quarterback next year, they're SOL. This past year's quarterback class was bad. And it was thought that next year's QB class would be way better. Unfortunately, a lot of the guys that received a lot of hype before the season have been massive flops. And there's only two guys that I feel are worth being first rounders. If you live, eat, breathe, and sleep football, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. JT Sports is available. The links are down in the description and pinned comment below. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy the content. Give us some suggestions, some feedback, any questions that you would like to ask. We will answer them on a future episode as well. So leave them in your review. We'll greatly appreciate it. And let's dive into it. You know, a lot has changed about Alabama since Nick Saban has retired and he's been replaced by Kalen DeBoer. But one thing that has remained the same about Alabama, despite Nick Saban being gone, is them still owning Kirby Smart and the Dogs. Alabama beats Georgia 24-21. They give Georgia their first home loss in 6 years. That's nearly half a decade without losing in Athens. That's a huge accomplishment. If you rolled off Alabama after their week 1 upset loss against Florida State, don't try to hop back on the bandwagon. No, you picked your side, so stay on that side. You said that Alabama was done. You tried to define the team that Alabama was going to be this season based off what they did in their first game of the regular season. In week 1, you never get the full version of any team. Some teams that are really good, sometimes they start out a little bit flat. when you're practicing and hitting nobody but yourself for 6-7 months, you're going to have some kinks to work out. And Alabama losing to Florida State, they obviously had some flaws that had to be addressed, and they fixed them. Kalen DeBoer, I still stand by this. A lot of you guys have been asking me this since Alabama lost to Florida State. Do I still believe that Kalen DeBoer was the right replacement for Nick Saban? Yes, I do. I feel there was no better replacement for Nick Saban than Kalen DeBoer. Because Kalen DeBoer, if your life was on the line and you had to pick any head coach to win a big game to keep you alive, you would choose Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer, over the last 3 years, has swept 3 of the consensus top 5 head coaches in the sport. Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, and now Kirby Smart. Yeah, his teams may play down the competition, but there's no head coach that has a team ready in prime time and big must-win games against the best of the best than Kalen DeBoer. Alabama, for the first time this season, they played a complete game. Their offense was completely scorching hot in the first half, 24 points. Ty Simpson was unconscious. He looks like Mac Jones 2.0. The accuracy, the anticipation that he throws with, he also has a slightly better arm than Mac Jones, and he's a way better athlete than him. And I never doubted once how good Ty Simpson was going to be. Everybody's shocked about how good he's looked these last couple of weeks. Not me. Kirby Smart, before this game, during his weekly press conference when he was previewing this matchup, he said that Ty Simpson was the hottest quarterback in college football. And that was thought to be coach speak. He's just propping up the opponent to make them feel good. No, Kirby Smart just doesn't praise anybody just for the sake of praising them for coach speak. If Kirby Smart says that you're a good quarterback and you're playing good football, those things are true. And it was evident tonight because Ty Simpson, with the receivers that he's throwing to, it's kind of impossible for him not to be a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. You got Isaiah Horton, transferred from Miami. He was balling out. He was doing this thing. We know about Ryan Williams. Jeremy Bernard is the guy who oftentimes gets overlooked because he's quiet, doesn't really have the big name recognition of Ryan Williams, but he's the best receiver on Alabama's team. I feel he's better than Ryan Williams. He's more complete. He doesn't drop as many passes as Ryan Williams. He's a great route runner. He's good after the catch. He's going to be a first-round receiver next year. He has a lot of similarities in his game to Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, like Isaiah Horton, or not Isaiah Horton, but Jeremy Bernard, he was quiet. But he was a guy who, when he was on the field, his name was loud because he was constantly making plays. And every time I watch Alabama, Jeremy Bernard seems to be the go-to guy. Ryan Williams is the big play receiver that they look for the explosives. But Jeremy Bernard is the guy who moves the chains. He's the security blanket for Ty Simpson. And Alabama, in the second half, their defense said, hey, offense, y'all can take a back seat. We're going to win this game. And they only held Georgia to 7 points. Georgia offensively, they couldn't really get anything going. You know, they would have moments during the game when they would have a few plays. The ground game would look really dominant. But when Georgia's offense really needed those gotta-have-it plays, like that 4th and 1 in the fourth quarter in the red zone, they were unable to get them. And when Alabama got that stop, that's the moment when the game I felt was decided. Because at that point, you knew that Alabama's offense probably wasn't going to be able to do anything. Alabama's defense was going to be the unit to call game, and they did that. Cam Womack, he's had his fair share of criticisms from the Alabama faithful, and most of those criticisms are warranted with how Alabama's defense has struggled against dual-threat quarterbacks. But against Gunnar Stockton, Alabama's defense played as good as what they've had under Cam Womack against a dual threat quarterback. I mean, Gunnar Stockton, he made a few plays, but he wasn't as good as what he was against Tennessee a few weeks ago. When it comes to Georgia falling to Alabama at home, I don't really think there's any big overreactions that should be made about it, because Georgia lost to Alabama because Alabama just was the better team. They just made more plays late down the stretch. Georgia still is a good team. They had moments during this game when they could have took control, like the back-to-back drops that they had late in the third quarter. You had one guy who dropped a wide-open touchdown, just an absolute dot that Gunnar Stockton delivered, and he was unable to get the package to the doorstep. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a rematch of this game in the SEC championship like we've seen so many times before. This is the class of the South. When you think SEC football, you think both of these programs. Both of these programs are the gold standard of college football. Alabama, Georgia is one of the most watched games every single year because these two programs are the model for what every program in college football hopes to be. Every program wants to try to replicate what Georgia and Alabama have done and what they are. And even though Nick Saban is gone, what still remains the same is that Alabama still owns Kirby Smart and Georgia, and they went 24-21. Oregon 30, Penn State 24. James Franklin falls to 4-21 as Penn State's head coach against top 10 teams. But this game wasn't about James Franklin's big game struggles. This game was about Dan Lanning showing everybody what Oregon has become. And that's the West Coast version of Georgia. What Dan Lanning has turned Oregon into is Georgia on the West Coast. Oregon isn't your run-of-the-mill West Coast team that wants to beat you with finesse, not play great defense like USC. Oregon is built just like Kirby Smart's Georgia squads. They have some freakazoids on the line of scrimmage. You can tell Oregon, Georgia, offensive linemen, defensive linemen with the way some of these players' prototypes are. If you see a defensive lineman or offensive lineman coming out of high school that's 315 plus pounds, runs 4.8, 4.7 in the 40-yard dash, he's an Oregon, Georgia offensive lineman. There are just certain interior players that you look at, and you look at their physique, and you look at their player build, and you say, yeah, you're Oregon Duck. Yeah, you're a Georgia Bulldog. The way Georgia and Oregon are built on a line of scrimmage is exactly like how NFL teams are built. And that's why it's so hard to beat these two teams. And Oregon, they controlled Penn State for the majority of this game. Penn State was believed to have the best offensive line in college football coming into this season. Well, they didn't look like it against Oregon. Oregon's defensive line had their way. The rushing attack for Penn State didn't get going until a little bit late in the fourth quarter, which better late than never. But Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, they got held in check for most of this game. And when Oregon forced Penn State to have to go to Drew Aller to win the game, that's when you knew Penn State lost. And I thought that Penn State was already out of this game when they went down 17-3. So when they came back and they were able to get the game into overtime, which we got to give kudos to Andy Nicola-Nicky for that fantastic play call that got this game into overtime. The jet sweep with the zone read fooled everybody that was watching, everybody in that stadium, and everybody on that Oregon defense, because I didn't even know that the receiver had the ball. So when he scored, I was shocked. I thought that Drew Aller kept it. That was an incredible play that Andy Nicola-Nicky dialed up, and he called it again in the first overtime period. Andy Nicola-Nicky should be a head coach, and I don't know when a school is going to be wise enough to give him that opportunity to be one. But whoever does, they're going to end up getting themselves a stud, man. This loss is not on Andy Nicky. I mean, he was in his bag in the fourth quarter and in overtime. The defense, you know, they made some big plays, but unfortunately, Drew Aller lost this game for Penn State. And James Franklin and Drew Aller are the best quarterback head coach duo in college football because they perfectly mirror each other. They're the perfect reflection of what both individuals are in their respective fields. James Franklin is an overrated head coach. He's good, but not great. He's not top 10. I don't even think he's top 15 in my book. And Drew Aller, for a guy that's viewed as a potential first-round quarterback, he never plays like it in the big games. And Penn State fans don't want to admit this, but you got to be honest. Drew Aller is the biggest disappointment in the history of this football program because he was supposed to be the guy that finally got James Franklin over the hump, that finally got Penn State to a national championship, that will finally be able to help Penn State win games against teams like Oregon. But just like James Franklin, Drew Aller as well, he doesn't rise to the occasion against the best competition that Penn State plays. I've never once have seen Drew Aller play a great game against a great opponent. And when he ended up replacing Sean Clifford, it was believed he was going to elevate Penn State. And he hasn't. If anything, he's done the complete opposite. He somewhat has held this team back. If you had at least an above average quarterback, you would have won this game. Hell, Ohio State won a national championship with Will Howard, who got replaced by Avery Johnson. Michigan won the national championship with the handoff merchant. Georgia won a national championship back-to-back with a walk-on at quarterback. So James Franklin having Drew Aller and not being able to beat the Ohio States, beat the Oregons, is a major disappointment. Because Drew Aller, when he was coming out of high school, he was one of the best quarterbacks in his class. And he was supposed to be the one, that generational quarterback that could finally help James Franklin get over these big game demons that he has. And I like James Franklin a lot. He's a great person. He's a good coach. But unfortunately, he isn't able to win the big games. Dante Moore was balling out. He wasn't fazed by the whiteout. He wasn't fazed by the ruckus home field advantage of Penn State. He was cool as a cucumber. He did nothing but make plays and deliver when Oregon needed him to. 3 touchdowns. He had the interception, but it was on a 2-point conversion, so I don't really know if it counts. But right now, Dante Moore is playing like the best quarterback in the Big Ten. And if he was to declare for the NFL draft next year, he would be QB1. There's no quarterback playing better football than Dante Moore in the Big Ten at the moment. And he's been as good as advertised and then some. I don't know why it didn't work out with him and Chip Kelly at UCLA, but he's a stud, and he just might be the one that finally delivers Oregon that hardware that they've been missing and they've been looking for a while, which is that national championship trophy. He has that He has that arm strength. He has that dynamic ability to extend plays when things break down. He was fantastic, and he outplayed Drew Aller in this game. Penn State, you give them Dante Moore, and you give Oregon Drew Aller, Penn State's walking away with the win, and Oregon's walking away with the L. So you can put this loss on James Franklin, but I believe the majority of this loss falls on Penn State's players not being able to execute in the crucial moments, mainly Drew Aller. Coaches coach, and players make plays. Guys got to go out there and execute. Oregon, they continue to roll through the Big Ten. They haven't lost the Big Ten game yet, and they just got their foot in the door in this conference. And they've already ran through the majority of the top teams in this thing. They've beat Ohio State. They've beaten Michigan. They've beaten Penn State. Oregon really doesn't have anything to prove but to finally get it done and to win that national title. And this game gives me a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to do so. James Franklin's tenure as Penn State's head coach has been a broken record stuck on repeat. He's a good enough coach to get you to buy in the offseason that this could finally be the year Penn State gets over the hump and James Franklin brings another national championship back to Happy Valley. Then the regular season rolls around, you're undefeated, then you got Ohio State on the schedule. Then you got Oregon on the docket. Then you play those teams, you lose those games, and then reality hits you. And then the optimism that you had in the preseason eventually erodes and turns into disappointment with how the season ends, falling short of winning the Big Ten and winning the national championship. James Franklin's tenure at Penn State has been exactly like Mark Richt's tenure at Georgia. Mark Richt, like James Franklin, was a good coach. It was hard to find a reason to fire Mark Richt because he always won 10 games, always had Georgia respectable in the polls. You always believed that Georgia was just a few pieces away from winning it all. And then once it was time for Mark Richt to play the games, he was able to win most of them, but he couldn't win the games that mattered, which was beating Alabama and beating Florida, which is the same issue that James Franklin has. James Franklin, like Mark Richt, is a good coach, is able to win the majority of his games, but can't win the games that matter when it comes to Penn State competing for the national championship. Eventually, Penn State's going to reach a point when they're going to have to make a move on James Franklin. He'll slip up. Penn State will have an 8-4, 9-3 season, and they'll use that as means to move on from James Franklin. And it's hard to replace a guy like James Franklin because how better can it get? It's only a small percentage of head coaching candidates that can deliver consistently the results that James Franklin gives you. And the same argument was made against firing Mark Richt. But eventually, Georgia slipped up. Mark Richt had a season when Georgia won 9-8 games, and they used that to get rid of him. And they found Kirby Smart. Can Penn State find a Kirby Smart? Maybe, maybe not. You never know unless you try. And that's the thing with Penn State. You don't know what you're capable of finding to replace James Franklin if you don't try. How do you know if you can't find a better coach than James Franklin if you don't at least attempt to do so? James Franklin, good guy, good head coach, but never wins the games that actually matters. He is 4-21 against the teams that Penn State has to win in order to win the Big Ten and in order to win a national championship. And if you're losing to Oregon, then it's only right to believe that you're going to lose to Ohio State. And if you make it to the Big Ten championship and you got to play one of those two teams again, you'll lose again. Mark Richt, when he was going up against Urban Meyer, he was 1-5. Couldn't find a way to get over Urban. Couldn't find a way to beat Nick Saban. And even when he came close to getting past Nick Saban, still couldn't get it done. Seems like the case with James Franklin. He was close to beating Oregon tonight, but his quarterback let him down. Just like with Georgia and Mark Richt, when they were close, they just had moments when they just weren't able to deliver. And those small moments is what held Mark Richt from submitting himself as an elite head coach, from being able to get Georgia to that next level. You can make excuses for James Franklin and say that Penn State hasn't had the resources or the same things that Michigan and Ohio State have had, but yet the point differential in those games is only one possession. So it's not as if Penn State has been out-rostered to death. And Oregon who's fairly new to the Big Ten, has just run through this conference. They've yet to lose a Big Ten conference game. And they're new to this conference, still learning it as they go, and yet they've done nothing but dominate. Why can't Penn State do the same? Why can't Oregon win big games like Dan Lanning can? I don't see any differences between Penn State and Oregon's programs. The only difference is the head coaches. Dan Lanning knows how to win the big ones. And he's a lot younger than James Franklin. James Franklin has a lot more experience than Dan Lanning. But Dan Lanning is the better coach. And Penn State has a great team this year. And they still couldn't get it done. Mark Richt had great teams. Couldn't get it done. His last 6 seasons at Georgia, he was 14-23 against the top 25. James Franklin, he's 1-19 against top 5 teams, and he's 13. Illinois got a big bounce back win, taking down USC 34-32. They got throttled by Indiana their last go around, and you can tell that they had a chip on their shoulder for this game, and they controlled USC up until the final minutes of the fourth quarter when USC came back. Jordan Mailata hit Jacoby Lane to end up taking a 1-point lead late. And then Illinois ends up clutching up, hitting the game-winning field goal, and they shake back. USC gets their first loss of the season in similar fashion that we've been accustomed to seeing USC lose games under Lincoln Riley. How many times have we had this discussion about USC being unable to finish? If there were awards given to teams that dominated games up until the final 5 minutes, USC would be one of the recipients of it. They played great football up until it's time to finally play good enough football to walk away with the win in big games. And yeah, USC has some injuries going into this game against Illinois, but injuries didn't keep you from losing this game. What hurt you from losing this game is that your offense was getting dominated up front by Illinois' defensive line. Your run game was pretty good at times, but not as good as what it needed to be in order to beat a team like Illinois. USC is still trying to win in the Big Ten the same way they were winning in the Pac-12. Finesse football. We're going to beat you on the edge. We're going to beat you on the perimeter. And they can't beat you on the line of scrimmage. And until USC gets more depth on the trenches and they get a lot better on the offensive line and on the defensive line, they're going to keep having these games when they lose to teams like Illinois that don't really do too many things offensively. They keep it basic. They're just going to run power the majority of the time. And if they throw it, they're looking for number 80. And there's nothing really going for anything explosive. You know, Illinois' offense is methodical. They just do enough to drive down the field and score points. They're not trying to get a bunch of big plays. They'll call a few trick plays here and there, but you can tell that Illinois knows who they are as a football team, and they're comfortable with their identity. USC, what is their identity this year? What is this team? What is something that USC can hang their hat on when things get rough late in the game that can be a crutch for them? For Illinois, it was the run game. It was the pass rush. It was the defensive line. For USC, what was it? I thought Jaden Mailata looked really good. To me, if the NFL draft was to start today, if he was to declare, he'll be the first overall pick if I was a GM and I need a quarterback. Great arm, great athlete, and plays very well in structure. Now, he did have an interception in the second half of this game that was a little costly, but overall, he played good enough for USC to win this game. And I feel he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country at the moment and definitely in the conversation for the Heisman Trophy. USC, in spite of how great Jaden Mailata will be this season and how good he played in this game, The physicality of Illinois was just too much for them. USC is still struggling with the Big Ten's physicality. They always say styles make fights. And Illinois' style play gave USC problems. They just weren't able to bang in the trenches with Illinois. And the body clock theory, how West Coast teams have early kickoffs around 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, I believe there is a lot of truth to that. When I was talking to one of my friends that was asking me who I was picking to win this game, I was telling him that I don't like USC in this road spot because of the early kickoff time. And with conference realignment, this was a huge concern that most people had about USC and Oregon and Washington and UCLA coming into this conference, the amount of miles they were going to have to travel, the weird kickoff times they were going to have to deal with that they normally were accustomed to. What's ironic is Lincoln Riley was complaining about this throughout the week when USC was in a conference that was regional, where the travel benefited USC and it wasn't a disadvantage. It was the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 wasn't good enough for them. They needed more money, so they chased the bag. And unfortunately, when you chase the bag, sometimes not everything good comes with going after the money. And USC followed the money, and they got a disadvantage of now sometimes they may have these body clock games. I am not going to fade USC this season. I'm not going to change my outlook of this team because of this loss. I had USC going 9-3 before this season started. And I still believe that's what this team is going to be. They do have the ceiling to be 10-2, but I still believe they're going to have a few more games that they lose like this when they kind of struggle to keep up with the physicality of certain Big Ten teams, because Illinois doesn't embody the Big Ten better than what they do. Brent Bielema is a Big Ten OG. He had success in this conference when he was coaching up Russell Wilson, and he led Wisconsin and him to a Rose Bowl. So Lincoln Riley is still learning. USC is still learning how to adapt to the physicality of this conference. I believe eventually things will click for USC. It still is one loss. There's a lot of football to be played, but this definitely isn't a team that I look at right now and say, yeah, they can be a sneaky playoff team. I still think that USC is a year away from being an actual playoff contender. 24-19, Ole Miss takes down LSU. This could very well be the Ole Miss team that Lane Kiffin gets into the playoffs. Last year, it was thought to have been Lane Kiffin's best shot at reaching the playoffs with Ole Miss due to him having Jackson Dart at quarterback and a bunch of NFL guys on defense. And with the amount of new faces that he was bringing into this season, it was kind of hard to see Ole Miss picking up from where they left off last year, but they have. And their defense played fantastic against LSU. LSU's offense was completely boxed. And if it wasn't for that fluke touchdown that they got early in this game and Ole Miss offense getting out to a slow start, Ole Miss would have won this game by at least 3 touchdowns. LSU, for them to reach the CFP this year, their defense has to completely put this team on their back and do some extraordinary carrying, because their offense, it's a struggle for them to crack 20 points. Garrett Nussmeier still looks like the Garrett Nussmeier of last year, making reckless decisions, turnovers left and right. LSU's offensive line couldn't keep them upright, and they also didn't give him a ground game that could take a little bit of the pressure off him. LSU's offense is just in disarray. Brian Kelly knows it. He tries to play it off as them working through some growing pains, but we've gotten through the first quarter of this season, and we've seen LSU now in a few SEC games. And their offense has struggled in every single one of them. You struggled against Florida, and you struggle against Ole Miss, whose defense wasn't supposed to be as good as what they looked like in this game. And I'm not really a huge fan of Pete Golden. As a matter of fact, I'm probably one of his biggest detractors, but he was coaching circles around Brian Kelly and LSU's offensive coordinator, man. He had a counterpunch for everything that LSU tried to do offensively. Ole Miss, the new quarterback that they have, Trinidad Chambliss, I can't believe that he was playing Division II football. He is good enough to start on majority of top programs in America. Hell, if Florida State had him last year, they wouldn't have won just 2 games. He is a great quarterback. He has a good arm, good athlete. I salute Lane Kiffin for starting Trinidad Chambliss over Austin Simmons. When you have a guy that was highly touted coming out of high school, you invest a year of development into him with a red shirt, you pay him a lot of NIL money, it's a tough decision to shy away from him and go for a guy that is fairly new to the team, that doesn't have that much experience playing this level of football compared to a guy like Austin Simmons. But Lane Kiffin, his scheme can turn any quarterback into a good one, I believe. I believe that he could have turned Anthony Richardson into a good quarterback. With the way that he just schemes guys open, he just makes it so easy and fun to play quarterback for him. And Austin Simmons, I don't necessarily think that he was trash. I actually thought he was pretty decent. It's just he struggled to take care of the football. Trinidad Chambliss gives you the same thing that you get out of Austin Simmons, but without the turnovers. I am shocked that Ole Miss has been as good as what they've been after this first quarter of the season. I didn't think they would suck, but I did think that the defense was going to take a step back. The defense is still as good as what it was last year. If not, it may just be a tad bit better because I think the secondary is a little bit good. You don't just have one guy in Trey Amos. You got 2 really good coverage corners, and your safeties are also really good as well, and you're good against the run. LSU's offense is not playing up to its potential. They should not be struggling to crack 20 points. Garrett Nussmeier should not be struggling to get the ball to these receivers. He has one of the best receiving cores in all of college football. And yet when he's throwing these guys the ball, he's getting these guys almost sent to the hospital. He threw a hospital ball to Aaron Anderson, 2 of them. If Garrett Nussmeier continues to struggle, rather if it's injuries or not, Brian Kelly's going to have to start looking at Michael Van Buren. And Michael Van Buren, he's not a guy that's completely raw and no experience. He started a few games last year for Mississippi State and had a few big moments. So Michael Van Buren can play. Garrett Nussmeier, I know that Brian Kelly wants him to see it through. This is his final year. He has that number 18. They just don't hand that number out to anybody. But the guy has to start making plays. And with the way that Garrett Nussmeier has been playing, he's costing LSU, and their season is going to unravel if he doesn't step up and ends up playing like the guy that he was expected to play like before this season started. And he definitely isn't a first-round quarterback. We shouldn't even be mentioning first round and Garrett Nussmeier in the same conversation, because with how he just gives the football over like he's Santa's helper, I don't know any NFL team that would view that as franchise quarterback material. Franchise quarterback is somebody that when a game is on the line, they can go win it for you. Not somebody that the game is on the line and you're kind of thinking twice about if you want to put the ball in his hands. Texas A&M edges out Auburn 16-10. If you didn't watch a single snap of this game, I don't blame you, because this was a hard game to sit through and watch. It was a bunch of bad offense and a lot of dirty laundry being thrown on the field. And I have nothing against watching a good old school defensive slugfest like what we got week 1 with Texas versus Ohio State. But I hate watching games that have nonstop penalties, man. It's annoying, and it makes you disengage from the game when there's a whistle being blown after every play and there's constant stoppages because there's always a penalty happening. And if you look at this game from a box score standpoint only, you're probably having a hard time figuring out how Texas A&M outgained Auburn 414 yards to 155, and yet only won by 6 points. Most teams who have this big of a discrepancy in total yardage win in blowout fashion. Texas A&M went up against an Auburn defense that was absolutely carrying this team. Auburn's offense, I guess they missed the bus for this game, and they were at the hotel room when it was being played because the defense was the offense. You know what they say? Sometimes the best offense is a great defense, and Auburn's defense outscored Auburn's offense, which is an indictment on Hugh Freeze. Hugh Freeze has to go. He's an offensive-minded coach, and yet the worst part of Auburn's team is the offense. His play calling on Auburn's final possession and their loss to Texas A&M should have gotten him left on the tarmac after this game. He shouldn't have been able to fly back to Auburn with how bad his play calling was on Auburn's final possession. Auburn had no success throwing the football all game long. Jackson Arnold couldn't hit an open receiver to save his life, and the offensive line couldn't keep the brother upright long enough to find the open receiver. It seemed like he only had a nanosecond back there before a guy was clotheslining him and dragging him to the dirt. So I found it really stupid how Hugh Freeze, last two plays of this A&M game, 3rd and 1 pass play, despite the run game being the strength of your offense. Then on 4th and 1, you think he would be wise enough to finally run the football, but no, he tries to throw it again, and what happened? It's the same thing that was happening all afternoon. Jackson Arnold was running for his life and got sacked. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And that's exactly what Hugh Freeze did, and Auburn's lost to Texas A&M. There is no excuse for not calling a single run play on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1 consecutively, especially with how atrocious your passing attack is with one of the better receiving corps in all of college football. People don't realize how good Cam Coleman is. Cam Coleman is just as good as Jeremiah Smith, but you don't know that because Auburn's offense never shows you how good Cam Coleman is because the quarterbacks that they have can never give him the freaking ball, and Hugh Freeze doesn't know how to move him around and get creative enough to find ways to get him the ball so he can make plays. Cam Coleman, I hope he transfers after this season from Auburn because they are wasting his talents. He is one of the best receivers in this sport. Top 3, top 5, however you want to rank him, he's up there. But Auburn has him buried behind all of the other big name guys like Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith because their offense and quarterback play is just not good enough to find ways to get him involved. Auburn's defense, they get a 72-yard pick six to put Auburn back into the game when it looked like it was all but over. And then, you know, Hugh Freeze, he finally figures out that Jeremiah Cobb is a really good running back. He's averaging 4.7 yards per carry and yet only gets 6 touches. You know, Auburn, despite how bad the offensive line was and the passing game was, the ground game was still there. Texas A&M, the only difference between their offense and yours is that they could actually run the football, and they were able to win on early downs. They were able to win on 1st and 2nd down and be in more 3rd and manageable situations. And even then, they were in a bunch of 3rd and long situations, but they were more in 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8 situations. You were in 3rd and forever a bunch of occasions. With all the false start penalties you had, your left tackle had 2 of them. You said you was going to bench him, and you still had him out there committing false starts, costing you the game. Until Auburn is able to find a good head coach, there's no reason to watch a single snap of this game, of this team this year, because Auburn is probably going to be a below 500 team this year. Excuse me. I don't know how many games Auburn can win with this kind of style of play. Your offense is dependent upon your quarterback's ability to run the football. And if you can't run the football, then everybody knows that your passing attack is not going to be good enough for you to rely upon, because Jackson Arnold just isn't a consistent passer right now. Now, maybe he becomes that next year. But this year, though, Auburn's defense is going to have more performances like the one they had this afternoon if Auburn's even going to be able to be above 500, because that ground game is really good once you get Jackson Arnold going. But everybody knows that's the key to Auburn's offense. And yes, you got to be able to run the ball when people know you want to run the football, but you also got to be able to keep the defense guessing. And Texas A&M wasn't guessing with Auburn's play calling, because they knew that early in the game they struggled running the football. They abandoned it. So on first and second down, they ended up getting behind the chains. And that's why they couldn't convert on third down that often, if any at all. I think they only got 1 third down conversion, which I think came in the second half, late in the third quarter. And their offensive line gave up 9 sacks against OU last week. So you thought that the game plan would have been a little bit more run-centric than what it was. And Hugh Freeze, I guess he saw something completely different than what me and you saw, because he felt like the offense was still good enough for him to continue to keep dialing up passing plays, and none of them were working. So Auburn loses 10-16 on the road to Texas A&M. A&M improves to 4-0 on the season, and this is Auburn's second straight loss. Ohio State beats Washington 24-6. This game was a lot closer than what the final score shows. This was a slow, methodical, grinded out win for Ohio State. Their defense played great. They had 6 sacks. They had several tackles behind the line of scrimmage for losses. They were harassing Damon Williams, who is a really talented quarterback. I think Damon Williams is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football by the time the season ends up concluding. And for them to stifle him in this offense the way that they did is a testament to how good of a defensive coordinator Matt Patricia is. I like how Washington wasn't afraid to take chances in this game. When you have the defending national champions in your house, you got to roll the dice. You got to take chances, and you got to throw caution to the wind in order to beat this team. Championship teams, you don't just beat them settling for field goals in the red zone. And you definitely don't beat them attempting awful fake field goals. The issue I feel with Washington in this game is that they were pressing a little bit too hard. They were trying a little bit too hard to force certain things that they should have just let them come. Because their defense, up until, after halftime, they were hanging around. Some of the decisions that they made with the play calling, with the fake field goal, they didn't really have to do. They were in the game. They kind of were trying to outthink the room, and they outsmarted themselves. That fake field goal cost you 3 points. Those 3 points could have changed how you called the game on offense. Could have changed how aggressive you were on defense. And you know how they always talk about depth, how great teams in college football can wear you down because they're just able to rotate more bodies and keep guys more fresh. Well, you saw a clear example of that in this game, because in the first half, Washington's defense was outstanding. In the second half, their defense was struggling to get off the field. And you can tell that Ohio State, every possession that they got the ball, they were wearing that Washington front down more and more. And Washington just simply didn't have the bodies nor the depth to keep guys fresh enough in order to get enough key stops to buy their offense a little bit more time to maybe put a touchdown on the board. For the future of Washington, though, they do look like they could be a sleeper team that could steal a playoff spot in the Big Ten. USC, Nebraska, they were viewed as sleeper teams, possible playoff teams in this conference, but now it kind of looks like they're more so 9-win teams. They're not quite ready to be a playoff team. Maybe Washington is. You got Jedd Fisch, who is one of the more underrated and underappreciated head coaches in college football. And if you're a Washington fan, you got a bright future with him if you're able to keep him around, because that Florida job could come open. And Florida looks to be Jedd Fisch's preferred destination where he wants to coach at. It's viewed to be his dream job since he has some Florida ties. So if Billy Napier gets fired, I don't think that Jedd Fisch is going to remain at Washington for too much longer. And it's unfortunate because he's a really good program builder. He's great at recruiting because he doesn't just look at recruiting rankings. He's actually good at evaluating talent. He knows what NFL talent looks like. He knows how to develop it as well. And he just has a good understanding of how you mix both the NFL and college football together to build a good program. And I think eventually Washington will be able to win games like this in the near future, as long as Jedd Fisch stays. But, this one, you were able to show some fight and show that, we're not too far away, but we still have some ways to go. Before we got the Alabama, Georgia, and Oregon-Penn State classics, we got treated to a classic before those games kicked off between Tennessee and Mississippi State. Tennessee was in a little bit of a dogfight in Starksville, 41-34. Vols eke out a really gritty win. And at one point, it looked like Mississippi State was about to pull off the upset, man. That defense, that secondary that Mississippi State has was putting the clamps on Tennessee's offense at one point. I mean, they were on Tennessee's receivers like White on Rice. They had 2 interceptions on Jory Aguilar. But unfortunately, Tennessee's offense is just too good to hold down under 30 points. For an offense that had several turnovers, to still put up 40 points and win on the road in the SEC is a testament to how elite Tennessee's offense is. I don't think you can make an argument that there's a better offense in college football right now than Tennessee's. They can throw it on you. They can run it on you. Their offense is pretty good. There's a bunch of different ways that Tennessee can beat you, along with their defense still being able to show up and make big plays and big moments with how good their pass rush is. And that linebacker that they have, oh my goodness, he was all over the place. The dude had like 100 tackles. It seemed like every play he was either making a tackle on somewhere around the proximity of the play ending. Mississippi State, although they didn't win this game, they proved that they're going to be this year's Vanderbilt. There always is a team that is projected to be bad, that ends up shocking everybody, and is better than expected. Last year was Vandy. This year is Mississippi State. They can win 7-8 games. With how they looked against Tennessee, let's not forget they also beat Arizona State earlier during this season. This is a capable football team. I like them to beat Florida. I thought that this was one of the few gimme wins that Florida could get in conference play, but it looks like not. Blake Shapen, he had 2 bad turnovers that kind of gave Tennessee this win. He had an interception. He also had a fumble that was a scoop and score for 6, which I can't really put that on him because he didn't really see the cornerback that was coming off the edge with the cornerback blitz, and he just laid him out, gave him that Ray Lewis Madden 06 hit stick special, and they took that thing all the way back to 6 once it came out. I didn't even know if he was going to get back up and take another snap in this game. I was shocked that Blake Shapen came back after that, boy, because if I was him, they probably would have been stretching me out off the field on the ambulance. Probably would have had to airlift me to the hospital, boy, because that was a gruesome hit. Tennessee showed last year that they're close to being an elite program. The only thing that you have to see before you can officially give Tennessee the elite program stamp is making it back to the playoffs for a consecutive season, because then it shows that you no longer have to rebuild for 2-3 years after you have a big season, because your recruiting, your player development, and how you go about getting guys out of the transfer portal is good enough to where you simply reload like Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. And right now, Tennessee is stuck in that tier 2 of SEC teams that are close to being on the level as Alabama and Georgia, but still need a little bit more consistency. With this win, it's a sign that Tennessee is a good team. Are they an elite team? We don't know that yet, because they had the opportunity to show that they were an elite team against Georgia, and they lost. You got another opportunity coming up in a few weeks. You go on the road to take on Alabama. You got Kentucky on the road. You got Florida on the road. You got Vandy on the road. The biggest game is Alabama. If Tennessee can beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, they control their destiny to making it to the SEC championship more than likely. And they pretty much all but assure that they're going to have a ticket in the college football playoffs again, as long as they can survive any other upset losses, because they do got to play Vandy to end this season on the road, and Vandy is even better than what they were last year. So if you can have 3 turnovers and still put up 40 and win with your defense combining for 5 sacks and level 11 TFLs, then you're a good football team. But I still have to see a little bit more before I'm ready to anoint Tennessee as an elite team. But they continue to prove me wrong. Joey Aguilar, he's a gunslinger. He's going to take chances. Sometimes they're going to cost Tennessee, and sometimes they're going to work out. Chris Brazil, he was a monster. You talk about having a coming out party. He was making big play after big play for Tennessee. Had one that got called back. I got into an argument with one of my homies who, like me, is a Miami Hurricanes fan. And he was telling me that Florida State is going to lose to Miami because of how they looked in their upset loss to Virginia. And I was telling him that you can't define Florida State by their first loss against Virginia, because the Florida State team that we saw against Virginia is not going to be the same Florida State team that shows up this Saturday against Miami. This is a prime bounce back opportunity for Florida State. They beat Alabama week 1 in Doak Campbell. That wasn't a fluke win. Alabama just beat Georgia. So Alabama is a good team, which means that FSU has to be a pretty good team too. Now, although Florida State isn't as talented as what Miami is, rivalry games aren't decided by who has the more talented rosters. Rivalry games are much different from any other ordinary regular season game, because you know this team better than anybody else. You play them every single year. You know their habits. You know their tendencies. So when you have a team that is just above average, they can punch up with their rival. We've seen it plenty of times with Michigan upsetting Ohio State despite being a 3-touchdown underdog last year. You also seen it several times when you see Alabama getting upset by Auburn. You know, the best team doesn't always win. Talent is a small part of the equation to determining the outcome of games. You got to go out there and make the plays. And in rivalry games like Miami, FSU, you can assure that this is going to be a game that comes down to the wire. And this is a Miami fan. I'm not expecting for Miami to just roll Florida State. And I don't think that this is going to be the easy win that my homie and some other folks out there are trying to make it out to be. when you have to play your rival, it's hard to win, especially if you got to play your rival in their home turf. And winning on the road in college football, we all know, is very difficult. The majority of upset losses occur on the road. And we've seen a lot of upset road losses happen every single week. And we very well could see another one happen in Doak Campbell with Miami. Could we get a Mario Cristobal special? Is this going to be one of those games that Miami plays down the competition somewhat? Because Miami is expected to win this game by a good majority of people. A lot of folks that I talked to sound like they would be really shocked if Florida State could pull this win out. And even though I still believe Miami will win this game, I wouldn't be shocked if they lose it. And just because I'm a fan of this team doesn't mean that I'm just blindly going to believe that Miami's going to win every single game for the sake of it. Because I bet on these games. And you can't bet on these games using your fandom to affect your judgment with what games you bet on and which games you don't. And right now, Miami is a 4.5-point favorite. I feel really hard-pressed right now to take Florida State to cover that plus 4.5-point spread. I think that this is a game that's going to come down to the last play, a game-winning field goal, a game-winning sack, and that ends up being the difference in it. I know that Miami is more talented than Florida State, but I'm trying to tell you people that you can't always judge and gauge these rivalry games off talent, off momentum, because college football is a week-to-week game. Just because Florida State lost to Virginia last week doesn't mean that they're locked to lose to Miami, because we've seen plenty of teams have an upset loss the previous week and come back with the big bounce back win the following week. Prime example, look at what Illinois just did to USC after they got a 60-burger put on them by Indiana. So never underestimate the motivation of an upset loss and home field advantage. And those two things make me a little bit concerned about Miami's chances of walking out of Doak Campbell with a W. If you are a fan of the NFL and your favorite team needs to draft a quarterback next year, they're SOL, because this year's quarterback class, run that back. If you're a fan of the NFL and your favorite team has to draft a quarterback in next year's draft, they're going to be SOL, because if you thought this past year's quarterback class was bad, next year's quarterback class is going to be 2 times more worse. Because there's probably only about 2 quarterbacks right now that will be worthy of consideration of first-round selections. Run that back. If you're a fan of the NFL and your favorite team has to draft a quarterback in next year's draft, you're SOL. If your favorite NFL team has to draft a quarterback in next year's draft, they're SOL, because if you thought this past year's quarterback class was bad, next year's quarterback class is going to be 2 times more worse, because there's only 2 quarterbacks right now that are even worthy of first-round consideration, and they're not even locks right now to be first-round picks, and that's USC's Jayden Maiava and Miami's Carson Beck. Jayden Maiava, he has good mobility, he has a very good arm and throws with really good touch, and he's better playing within structure than what Caleb Williams is. And if you have to draft a quarterback in a weak quarterback class, then you're better off rolling the dice, drafting a quarterback that comes from QBU, the quarterback whisperer, Lincoln Riley. In college football, it's often debated who's RBU, wide receiver U, DBU, QBU. Nobody really talks about, because there aren't really any schools that consistently put out NFL quarterbacks routinely. But there is a coach that does, and that is Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley is QBU. There is no QBU in college football. QBU is Lincoln Riley. He's the quarterback whisperer. So if there is a team that has to draft a quarterback Jadamoyava probably would be the safest bet because every other quarterback that's played from Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, all have had modest success, if not a lot of success in the NFL. Carson Beck, he's your prototypical, traditional drop back pocket passer, but he does have mobility, so he can pick up a few yards with his legs. If he has the running lane and it's there, he can do a little bit of damage. But he more so is like a CJ Stroud kind of quarterback. He can extend plays. He can, maybe get 3-5 yards on the ground here and there, but he's going to tear you up from the pocket. And before last year, he was viewed as a potential top 5 pick. Now, the arm strength is there. The velocity is there. The decision-making still, I want to see more. I want to see Carson Beck continue to show that he can play mistake-free football this year. And if he can do that, then I can see him being a first-round pick, although he probably doesn't have the ceiling that you would like for a first-round quarterback. If you're drafting Carson Beck, how desperate are you? Are you going to take him in the top 5? Or are you going to take him in the top 10? I don't think teams are going to be that desperate. Teams weren't that desperate to draft Kenny Pickett. So a guy like Carson Beck, he probably would be available in the mid to late portion of the first round. Same thing with Jadamoyava. Now, everybody else outside of Jadamoyava and Carson Beck don't deserve to be drafted in the first round. Cade Klubnik is a wash, all right? I don't even know if he'll be a day 2 draft pick at this point. Drew Waller, we just saw him throw the game away against Oregon. And I've been telling people repeatedly that Drew Waller isn't first-round material. I don't care how far you can throw a football and how fast you can run and how big you are. Can you make good decisions with the football? Can you win me a game? Can I trust you with the ball in your hands, game on the line? We need a touchdown to win to get it done. I don't know if I can say that about Drew Waller. Now, Lenore Sellers, I like Lenore Sellers. I want the Steelers to draft Lenore Sellers because I feel he can be what we all thought Anthony Richardson had the ability to be. He's a lot more polished on the ball than Anthony Richardson. Still needs a lot of work with his mechanics and his accuracy, but he's more experienced. And with one more year of added development sitting behind a vet, I think Lenore Sellers could be a really good NFL quarterback, especially if there's a quarterback needy team in the AFC and you're a team like the Raiders, you're in the division, you got Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, you need an alien of your own. And Lenore Sellers very well could be that. And if you're going to make it out of the AFC, you got to have an alien quarterback that can compete with the Mahomeses, the Lamars, the Josh Allens. Lenore Sellers would fit that description. And I feel he would be a lot better than Anthony Richardson when he was coming out due to him having more starts under his belt and way more experience than AR. But the quarterback class this year in 2026, it's just not good. The 2026 quarterback class was supposed to be miles better than this past year's quarterback class. There was like 4 or 5 guys that were expected to be first rounders, and now there's only 2 guys that look like Friends first-round picks in Jadamoyava and Carson Beck. So at this point, if you're a team that's eyeballing a quarterback next year, you probably want to look outside of the draft, free agency. Maybe you try to force a trade for Kyler Murray or something like that. But next year's quarterback class is not going to be any better than the quarterback class we just had.